This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Paul Hansen. Thurley, Ruxton by Philip Verrill Mighels. Chapter 23. The Soup Thickens More. The next few days developed a number of factors, excitements, and skirmishes leading toward things climacteric. Thurley and Alice had never been so completely engrossed with social functions and diversions. On 2 successive nights they attended the opera, both occasions being notable for brilliance and increasing furor of the socially elect over the many appearances of the princess. The persistence with which Alice Van Kirk evaded any and all allusions to her guest's identity, and the unanimous infatuation of all the men permitted to come within her circle. Annoyances by the daily press, sufficiently persistent from the first, were rapidly multiplied as reporters, camera demons, and ridiculous rumours hung upon Thurley's movements night and day. Despite it all, she rode her horse 3 mornings fairly early, accompanied by her groom, on 2 excursions. The hour she chose was one in which the park was practically deserted by the smarter set, who frequently ride for display, but the newspaper men were on hand, and the second morning, while on the third Kelsey Woods accidentally appeared in the saddle path, galloped to her side, and improved the opportunity for which she had longed with a cheer she could not have discouraged. The news of Wood's clever manoeuvre came duly to the ears of Thurley's other suitors, and aroused a storm of jealousy and counter-scheming. Faishi was irritated. Gaillard was particularly incensed. The Count was no rider, but feared and hated horses, while the college man felt that his special licence, granting him exclusive rights, had been unwarrantably violated. The tact and diplomacy of both Alice and Thurley were taxed to the utmost to maintain an armistice and avert internecine strife. Almost like apportionments of pie, the hours of Thurley's day and evening were sliced and awarded to their clamorous swains to keep them from ravening starvation. To Faishi fell a night with Thurley at the opera. Gaillard drove with the princess in her own victoria 6 or 8 times round the park. Stuyvesant came to dine at the royal palace, and sat with Thurley alone for nearly an hour afterwards. The Count, during the long and passionate love scene depicted in Tristan and Isolde, made a murmured declaration of his burning love, and demanded Thurley's hand in marriage. Gaillard, oblivious to all the world of carriages and people about them, announced his disgust with all her other various suitors, reminded Thurley of their past relationship, and desired her consent forthwith to an announcement of their engagement. Stuyvesant alone of the 3 behaved himself like a rational being. How she had parried the thrust of the Count's Vesuvian flames, or the gibes of Gaillard's resentful impatience, Thurley scarcely could have told. She only knew that Faishi had become intolerable, the maker of college widows impossible, and that neither had received satisfaction, though neither had been further incensed or even made wholly hopeless or unmollified. In such a game as she was playing, and engaged with such elements as Gaillard and his business partner presented, such timid and gentlemanly courtiers as Stetson, the Beau, the Captain, Dearborn, and even Kelsey Woods, were hopelessly distanced. Had it not been for her constant intercessions in their behalf on the part of Alice, These less aggressive suitors, with half a dozen more of similar calibre, must have suffered all but absolute annihilation. Stuyvesant, occupying a position unique among them all, yet unaware of the sheer relief with which Thurley turned to him as often as the game would permit, continued to be sorely puzzled by it all, while plunging more and more helplessly in love with the girl to whom he felt he had been guided by the fates. There were times when it seemed impossible to acquit her of utter heartlessness, times when he felt convinced that she had come to America not to make an alliance, but merely to practise arts grown weary in conquest at the court of Herzegovina. And if it should prove that she was merely amusing herself with them all, himself included, he could not see how beauty, graciousness, impulsive generosity, or any other of her many bewitching qualities could sufficiently excuse her conduct. Nevertheless, he confessed to himself that he had rather have known her even thus than never to have met her at all. Meantime, independently of Thurley's actions or wishes in the matter, Fieschi and Gaillard were arming for a bitter struggle that bore on events not yet even shadowed in the day, each having recognized in the other an insistent and tenacious rival for Thurley's final favour, had determined to exercise any possible advantage for his opponent's overthrow. The difference between the Anglo-Saxon and the Latin temperament was herein nicely illustrated. They were business associates, working together for a common end that should benefit them both. This to Gaillard was entirely apart from their sentimental battle, and sacred to business ethics and honour. To Fieschi it was one more element for a possible crushing of his enemy. Gaillard would have felt entire justification in attacking the Count from a moral or physical viewpoint, and leaving him with either a crippled body or a shattered reputation, while still maintaining the strictest scruples in their deal, which centred in the street. The Spanish Italian, on the other hand, was already deliberately planning his rival's financial ruin through treachery to their business agreement. He would gladly have stripped Acton Gaillard of name, honour, funds, or physical prowess, and to some such end he was bending all his forces, fiercely determined as he was to win the object of his covetous passions. Wednesday of the eventful week was scheduled for developments disturbing and sensational. Thurley returned to the avenue home at 4 in the afternoon from a drive with Lady Honor Calthrop and Kelsey Woods, expecting to dress for afternoon tea and be driven to a rendezvous with Alice, that they might proceed together to Mrs. Ashley Duane's. She found a note on her table addressed in the once familiar hand of Acton Gaillard. It was brief, but charged with significance. You evaded my proposal and gave me no definite answer in the park. I wish to know once and for all, without delay, will you be my wife? My sort of love can endure no more of this suspense and torture. With vivid memories of the things that have been, ever indulgently and lovingly yours, Acton. The threat was there, veiled, but none the less apparent to her keen, perceptive faculties, and Thurley was perturbed to the depths of her girlish, timid heart. She had hoped to postpone this too definite issue, hold Gaillard away as she held the others, according to her promise made to Alice. Her impulse from the first had been to tell him precisely what he was, and dismiss him for ever from her life. She realized her helplessness, however, and the power of his knowledge of the past. She was vexed and frightened together. loathing the man for attempting to take this advantage of the situation, yet afraid to answer to his curt demand with the scorn and indignation that he had always merited. She was wholly unstrung, especially in the absence of Alice, on whom she had learned to lean for the wisdom and calm of her ripened worldliness. She still stood unmoving, the letter in her hand, while her maids, Annette and Sophie, were patiently awaiting her pleasure to be dressed, when one of the servants knocked at the door and delivered a card, which Sophie received and carried at once to her mistress. Thurley took it mechanically, glanced at the name, and suddenly felt a new sensation of wonder. On the card was written in a woman's hand, Countess Viziano y Faishi. She turned to her maid, wholly unable to understand the meaning of the situation. "You're sure this card was for me?" "Yes, mademoiselle." A weight as something ominous seemed hovering oppressively in the air. A sense as of disturbing revelations or even menace in this unexpected visit took possession of her mind. Who the Countess could be, and what the purpose of her appearance thus, were beyond her powers of conjecture. She reflected rapidly that a scene might be impending, and a feverish wish for Alice increased her indecision. Flashes of intuition laid bare startling thoughts in swiftly moving progression, whence unexpectedly came her courage and even a desire to behold this mysterious visitor. She could not herself have determined. She merely knew abruptly that to see this Countess might even be a duty to them all. "You may wait," she said to the expectant maids, and proceeded lightly down the stairs. A moment later she entered the reception room. A small, dark-eyed young woman, flaming both inwardly and outwardly, rose from a chair to confront her. End of chapter 23.